Hi there. Every Sunday, a group of autistic people get together and drop in. It's an informal group, but some of the things that people say deserve a bigger audience. So they give us permission for us to put them in an edited reel, and that's what we're here for. Today's edited reel of the conversations that we have about our own autism. Cheers, enjoy.
Hi guys, we've got Devon with us today. Devon is working in autism. She has a relationship to autism through a colleague and friend. I haven't asked anything else about that, but she's definitely part of the professions. And I've had some lovely communication and correspondence with her. And so I thought it was lovely that she came in today and said hello before she then makes a recording with us. Okay, so that's where we are with this. Devon, this is Robbie, this is Ray. They drop in quite a lot.
Hiya.
Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Lucy.
Hello there.
We speak our words, we listen.
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 I'm going to kick us off and see whether it leads us out anywhere. I wrote an email over to Harry and I said that after all the years that we have been pushing him and me, 3 years I think it is, this November appointment we've got to make a presentation at the Liverpool Restraint Conference, it's got to be the last in this deal, this subject, this thing. We pushed and pushed. Nobody wanted it. We got there, we built it, we made it. And then now we're just saying it's done. We succeeded. It's over. It's the last one in the thing. How do people feel about that?
You've been doing the thing, running the thing, pushing the thing, getting in there, which you managed. But if you feel that this is the point to which you and also Harry are feeling that it's time to step back, then I certainly wouldn't get in your way. I do people with very good judgment. And so I would say, if you feel this has run its course, then it probably has run its course.
In the text, somebody's asking if it's the behaviourist conversation. And I think it's not the whole behaviourist conversation. It's the attempt to go to their conferences and describe the audio model as a way of creating equity and communication. I think that bit is over. If we're involving ourselves with them in the future, then I hope that what we've done is we've made enough of them aware of us to get some offers of some co-production now. And if we don't, then we also have to think, let's do it a different way then. That the strategy hasn't worked. We've given it our best shot and move on to something else.
I've been thinking a lot this week about making a live event out of your joy or one's joy, one's experience of joy, whether that be having a good space. But the reason why I think a lot of us don't fully engage with it is genuinely exhausting. And I'm not assuming that's an element in your decision, but you have to preserve energy. Hi, Teresa. Jules was just explaining that there's a conference he and Harry are attending in November, a restraint conference. It's the last event in a series of engagements and commitments they've made. And it's just a general kind of discussion now about that move to disengage to a certain extent from that commitment and experience and move on to other things. So we're discussing energy and commitment and about redirecting it. So Jules would just try to open up the floor to that process and decision.
Thanks for explaining that. Is the conference mostly directed to behavior therapy?
The way we got the opportunity was through probably the board of the British College of Behavioural Therapists, whatever it's called. It's their body over here. Speaking at their conference after previous conferences was the one that led to a PVS conference, which led to this opportunity, which is a kind of Vox Top recording session, autistic radio recording what happens at the conference, what people say at the conference, and then making it into podcasts and sending it out there. So is it too behaviourist at this point? An awful lot of people come from a learning in that kind of science background, but the conference itself is actually, they're the good guys. They're the people that are trying to convince other professionals to reduce the use of restraint in our institutions.
If you feel, and it's both you and Harry who feel this way, that it's not the best use of your energy right now, and I don't come to the meetings that you have on Monday mornings, so I think I miss maybe some things there. And I've listened to as many of the podcasts, and there were a couple of good people. I don't know if they'll be at the conference. One was a guy from Ireland, and the other one's name was Teresa. But it's not that you can't do this in the future. I think it's important if, in that, I'm going to call it an industry because it is, as thinking around this changes in the autistic, and as technology advances, I know it's scary, but I would imagine that possibly younger people, like the one who had the idea for the app, assuming he was younger, I think it's important if the more experienced people in the industry who may be opening their eyes to it maintain an awareness of you two. But I also you attend the next conference either, because I think your energy is really important.
Just to bring attention to the text there, Devon is here today. Devon is a researcher who emailed us and talked about maybe developing an app. And we had a bit of a stinker of a conversation about it at our meeting, and there was a bit of a misunderstanding. But Devon's here to be somebody that says that they can get over misunderstandings in communication. And I think that's great. So that's why Devon's popped in today. Devon also does have a link to autism, at least through a colleague. Does that frame it right for you, Devon? If you're not putting you on the spot, maybe you want to comment on that?
Yes. Thanks, Jules. First, my pronouns are she, her. I know my name, it's difficult to tell what my pronouns might be, but yes, I had contacted Jules, I'd say about a little bit over a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Right now, I have an idea for an app that would focus on supporting young autistic children to identify their own emotions, but also how to regulate some of those big emotions, if they're upset, sad, or angry, or fearful, anything like that, how to work with those emotions. And right now it's at a very early stage. It's really just an idea. I'm working with a company called Cognis. It's a no coding platform for developing apps. So I have no coding experience at all. But through this platform, you can put together an app with no coding experience at all. Right now, it's early days. It's an idea. And the reason I reached out to Jules, who was recommended to me by my colleague, is that it's really important to me that I emphasize the autistic voice throughout this app development. And I want to work closely with autistic people at the beginning and throughout, and even at the end, to make sure that the app itself aligns with the values and the needs of the autistic population. I have a small budget that I was awarded through my university, and the entirety of that budget is going to be used reimbursing autistic people for their time and to work with me on the app. And last thing is, I am also looking to develop animations, and they're very expensive, and I understand that. So almost the entirety of my budget is going to be dedicated to an animator who I'm hoping to get in that is neurodiverse or autistic themselves. So I'm hoping to have a code-produced piece of not research. I don't want to call it research because that's not the focus. It's more just developing this app and making sure it aligns with what autistic people want. And Jules, you're asking what links to autism do you have? I'm neurotypical myself, but I have been supporting autistic people, particularly children, my whole life. So not my whole life, I'd say starting in, over 15, 20 years ago. And now I am a lecturer at Queen's University. So now I'm moved into more of a research aspect because I'm not working in schools anymore. And I have several colleagues who are autistic, and that's how I discovered this radio podcast. Ray, you're asking, can it be explained to me, how are young children not able to identify their emotions, especially at a very young age? I find that from my experience when I've been teaching young students who are autistic, they can struggle to vocally express their emotions when behaviors are telling otherwise. And I think it's important to be able to teach them, work with them, for them to be able to identify those emotions, which I think could help support them when they're dealing with the more challenging emotions, such as anger or sadness. So they do have emotions, but I think that being able to support them in identifying those and communicating those could be beneficial. I hope that answers your questions. No, I don't think their emotions are wrong.
Hi, Devon. I've actually been thinking about this all week for some reason. And I think I want to say 3 unrelated things, which is what I usually do. So 1, I was only diagnosed at the age of 60. 2, my first university degree was in child psychology, and I sometimes participated that I was autistic, but probably had a huge curiosity about child psychology because I knew something was wrong. And some of the things I enjoyed the most were being a volunteer in research studies, or as young as quite young babies, where we would do things like hold them very closely and take them on trampolines. And I honestly was just a volunteer student, so I don't know what that was about. But intuitively, I thought, okay, find out about this. But I really believed in lots of research ahead of time. But then I was thinking later in the week about AI and technology. Not that you're using AI, but you would be using technology. In my feelings about apps. I have good and bad feelings about apps, but for the most of the week, I was thinking, wow, a lot of research has to go into this ahead of time. And then I was thinking about my own experience I did sometimes have an inability to explain what my emotions were. And I know when you're using examples, you're probably only using 2 obvious examples like anger or sadness. But I think one of the problems for me as an autistic child was that I would think and be able to explain what I was thinking more than I could explain but I know now, looking back, and also there are different ages at which all children come to certain milestones about these things. So I think if you are 8 years old, you reach certain milestones, and then 12 years old, you reach other milestones, and you start to really differentiate between categories of emotions, and there are so many of them. And I think that's true about autism. Every one of us is different. But what I would like to say is that we have, or at least I have, so many distinct emotions that I think I stopped expressing them to people because I think they thought, no, that's not 5 different things. That's one thing. And maybe they thought I was splitting hairs, or nobody has time for that. And so I hope, but final thing, it's 4. I did learn researching right up until now that even AI can be used in a very humane way, which I suspected last week, but I wanted to reconfirm somehow, especially in what I want to call a healthcare setting. I know there is research being done to show that it could help professionals to have technologies to save them time and to learn more about their patients so that the time they have together. But I'm so nervous because I think about my own self as a child, and I can do nothing to change history. And then, of course, I'm trying to layer on level 1 or level 2 or high functioning or whatever you want to call it into this as well. So I hope that jumble of stuff leads to some kind of conversation or maybe.
Wow, Teresa, there is so much in what you say that I just want to say me too. I have to make sure that everybody in the chat is being included in this. Starting immediately after what Devon was describing as an app, somebody asked, they have emotions, just not naming them. Somebody says maybe a disconnect between emotions and being able to describe them. Teresa says 1, 2. Ray asks, are their emotions wrong? So a challenge to the concept that what was perceived of as our emotions might be judged in some way. I'm commenting on what Teresa said about a load of different disconnects that she was going to say and describe, and I said the parts of what she said will make a whole, and I think they did make a whole rather elegantly, Teresa. Robbie says, one of the problems that I have had is from the differences in how I express emotions. He follows on to say, people often think that I am angry when actually I'm anxious. And GR says that when masking, he thinks that he used to act emotionally to copy and follow those around him. It's kind of social pressure. Ray says, emotion is a signal, ? Regardless of definition or meaning, ? And I think that is an interesting question to ask. I want to put my own comment in here. When my autistic daughter was in a difficult place emotionally and unable to express herself, I would watch my wife hold her and hug her if that was appropriate, or touch near her if that was appropriate, and wait. And there would be a conversation that went something like this. Are you having big emotions? And she would say yes. And then there would be a lot of very careful quietness and the opportunity for my daughter to explain the circumstances and what happened, and long form, free flow, bits and bobs to then put together as my wife listens. And then she gives some kind of acknowledgement to the whole thing to say that she feels like that sometimes, and when she feels like that time, she calls it this or that. And like Teresa says, there's nuance in every one of those big words, anger or whatever, because each different kind of anger is a different kind of anger, and each different kind of sadness is a different kind of sadness. But it comes around through story and closeness between the mum and the child, the parent and the child. And having seen that happen naturally and beautifully, I don't see how an electronic device gets into that human interaction.
I think, and all of this is much appreciated. It really is giving me much more perspective on what I intended to do. I think it could help, from my experience, giving autistic children a way of expressing what they are feeling if it is a big emotion. For example, I had intended for the app, if the child is non-speaking, that they can touch a button on the app that communicates what they're feeling in the moment. And I know that there's some comments in the chat about how emotions are very different for each person. And I know Teresa touched on that as well. And that is a big part of why I wanted to develop something like this too, because the key outcome, I would say, from my doctoral research is that emotions are very individualized, and how an autistic person might express their emotions, it's very different. It's different for every person, regardless of neurotype. But I think when it comes to research, especially, and behavior analysts, there's a tendency to base their decisions on what neurotypical standards are for expressing different emotions. And in the research, the definition of what happiness is or what sadness is really based on what a neurotypical person would engage in. And my argument from my research was that it is individualized, and we need to be operationally defining what happiness looks like on an individual basis for these children. And the reason I'm focusing on happiness is because I think that is one of the key aspects of quality of life. And how can we measure happiness? And how can we support autistic children to communicate when they are experiencing those big emotions? And Could that help with self-regulation? So they're not feeling the need to engage in distressed behaviors because they're having difficulty expressing those emotions. So one of the key features I wanted to include in this app is where the family or the child or whoever is doing the app can upload pictures of the child themselves, because I find that a lot of apps and social emotional learning curriculums are based on, again, on neurotypical standards, but also on just strangers. They include photos of people who are unrelated, no relevancy to the child themselves. So I think having a very individualized way of teaching would hopefully be helpful, but that's obviously, it's just an idea. So again, it's very early stages.
I'll just briefly explain what I've put in text there, because you brought up the word happiness and the idea of measuring happiness as quality of life. Since my diagnosis, I've noticed in the neurodivergent conversations one can participate in, joy is often used as a kind of core word, and it's often related to the idea of flow. So it's an experience that is known, people feel it, one pops in and out of it, perhaps, or maybe it's just constantly there, who knows? But it's interesting you speak of measuring happiness, because I think on that level, in this other word, joy, it is discussed in the community. Teresa's got a good question in chat there about the animation, Devon.
So Teresa's asking, are you suggesting that animation could be made to look like the child the way avatars can? So my idea was not to have animations of the child, but to have animations that explain emotions. But this is one of the reasons why I wanted to work closely with the autistic population of how do we define these emotions. I was wanting to include animations just to make them a little bit more engaging, very child-friendly, explaining what the emotions are.
Robbie comes in saying, for him, connection and belonging are a big part of happiness. Yep. And then Teresa says she's interested in the distinction between feeling and thinking, as well as the great comment on masking and numbness and how these layer together. And then I was just thinking that I'm feeling emotions right now, but I could not explain what they are particularly, and never have really.
I have a question just to add on to the layers of questions about feeling, masking, numbness, and even at least one or two of us here as grown adults often still not recognizing our emotions. What happens with me is if I'm really safe or not in a large group or whatever, I could approximate my emotions. But then layer on burnout, and when we feel we're in difficult situations is much more often than, say, a neurotypical person. I can't compute. It could take me, I would say on average 24 hours, but sometimes could be 6 months or whatever to figure out why a certain interaction is happening that way and what exactly I'm feeling to make myself shut down. But I can't appear to be shutting down because it's not safe. So one more thing I wanted to ask was, it's very likely that the child may not succeed. So what would the goal be for the child to feel successful at this?
And I think the goal would be that the distressed behaviors would reduce. So being able to communicate those big feelings, whether it's through the app or vocally expressing how they're feeling, could that lead to a reduction in these distressed behaviors? And then in turn, can this improve their quality of life? Because I've seen how damaging when these behaviors occur and how distressed the child is. And I feel like having a means of communicating either through the app or through learning those emotions, could that help them in any way?
In response to what Jules is putting in text, I think in later years, emotional feelings are very often triggered by and responses to very old formative experiences, almost traceable back to events where an initial formative experience kind of didn't play out in a comfortable way. and one grows with that experience and it resonates throughout life. And so everyday events very simple things can land you in a quite emotional scenario.
I don't think people really believe emotions when you express them when they are different to how they'd experienced emotions in the same situation.
Ray points out that thing itself is a fluid process, ? It changes, ? But he also said, Rob is right, judgment causes resistance in expression. It's that communication in a neurotypical world, ? It's about the standards that we are being asked to put ourselves to. He says, I had a bad experience with the gas engineer on Friday. Now I'm stressy and jittered about it. So really, we need to allow other people to talk about their week as well. And Ray points out that there's an aftermath to these experiences. Okay, GR, was it an imposition on your space that made it difficult? Was it the social pressure of having to deal with the person? Move to what Robbie says, and he also vocalized. I think people find it difficult to believe emotions when they are different to the emotions of other people. For example, they don't get the anxiety that phone calls me because it's not how they experience using phones themselves.
How we respond is all to do with all of our past experience. It's learnt.
But you're saying about the engineer, he'd serviced both heaters a year ago. At the office I said that I only wanted the main heater serviced as the other heater has been used in the last 12 months. And said if I changed my mind I could just ask the engineer when he turned up. He had, and he did, and did. Really didn't want to look at the second heater. I always mention I have autism when people enter the house. And he started with a bit of ableism and clearly showed that he didn't know the difference between psychological and neurological conditions. So when I said the neighbours had turned nasty, he said that it didn't matter, but shut up when I said it did because I got abuse from them when I walked past the house if they were in the garden, and I couldn't sit out in my garden when they were in theirs. Still enough, move on. So that in itself is just going to demonstrate an example of how other people, particularly neurotypical people, play down the autistic experience and how harmful and impactful that can be. Somebody may look at something simple, especially if someone out to do a job. They may look at something as simple and they can give simple instructions and everything be okay. But life is not like that.
I think what happens when you tell someone you're autistic, they stop listening the moment you say autistic and start making assumptions based on what's in the media and what they've seen elsewhere.
Yeah, that's very true. Everything, whether we like it or not, has a stereotype to it in people's eyes. Whether a good one or a bad one, but still a stereotype, an assumption. An assumption that's based on what's been seen in the media, or even just an assumption based on a previous experience with someone, particularly an autistic person, like someone in the family. Sometimes people that've got autistic children or autistic siblings or even autistic parents, because they've had experience of talking to them, they think that people who are autistic are very similar to each other, which we all know isn't true. But as you say, Robbie, it's all about assumptions and that can be damaging, even though there's no clear intent to cause anything negative, anything bad experience. It's just that assumption. And we do that all the time with so many other things. And it's sad that it happens, but it has to be talked about. It has to be talked about because these things still happen. Thanks, GF, for sharing that experience.
Still the assumption of autistic people having a learning disability or autism being a learning disability, because I found so many organisations want to run your life for you and not let you have any say.
I think what's happened with GR there is interesting because his strategy to logically explain things to somebody through science, when really they're just going to give a kind of banter back and they're not really thinking too much about their words, engaging with the subject. It's like the two people are having two different conversations, and in some ways, I would say it's not worth it. Don't take his coat. Don't let him put up his dukes and fight this one out with logic. And I'd say just it's not worth it. Just move on.
But, I had something that's very interesting. And it says that the engineer was inferring that a lot of people who are diagnosed don't have autism because suddenly there are so many autistic people. He mentioned the news that day saying that the increases in cases of OCD, and I told him that it was psychological and not neurological. So that's been kind of mentioned in a few of the podcasts actually. It's like people are saying, well, there wasn't autism in my day, and all of a sudden it's so fashionable. And then you need to explain why that's the case, and you feel, why should you need to explain this? From what GR's saying there, it sounds absolutely insulting what's being said, even though it was probably not meant to be intended to be that way. And I hate when people say, I saw it in the news, like the news is the full, truthful thing and source to basically go by. It's like, but I saw in the news this and I saw in the news that. It's very dangerous, that sort of approach. But looking at it, very typical of society in many ways.
In the text, Ray says, I don't mention autism. I just mention I have difficulties and will explain if asked. Points out that sometimes, though, it happens with family. And I think she's referring to these whole scenarios about having their opinions about autism there, but she has a voice and she might use it. Robbie says, sometimes people are not really listening, probably picking up on my joke about he's not worth it. And GR's saying, thanks, Harry. I did explain why there are more, improved diagnosis, etc. He was even in the paracetamol camp, referring to the Tylenol slur that's been happening in the United States out there. Hello, our autistic cousins in the United States. We feel for you. We know it's going on. To us, it'll help you. It'll give you some sanity in amongst all this insanity.
Yeah, that is what I meant, Jules. It took, I think because I like to explain things that way myself, even before I was diagnosed, if I was in a conversation with a person, I would at least try in 3 sentences of a back and forth to try to get the point across the way GR has. It's logical, and it's my temptation to do it. And it's not just with a person you've just met, like the man who was in GR's home, but it, in my experience, happened, and I didn't even know it, with my sister. My sister told my daughter, and then my daughter had to have a talk with me and say, Mom, you make Aunt Tracy feel stupid. But I didn't mean to, and I thought everybody cared. And I'm not saying, GR, you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying sometimes we have to do it if it's your own sister. Or in your case, somebody was in your home. There's something about Robbie's experience too. It's, about the phone. I do know people who experience that too. It's a really big deal.
My experience recently about the lack of understanding of autism was from the Employment Office, basically the government, to give universal credit. And they're well aware I've got autism. And what's been happening recently is I'm not long in universal credit. I go to the office to have kind of 20-minute interviews. It would be every 3 months to see how things are. And who I've been meant to be seeing was a work coach, which I'm happy with. They have been available, I need to have been there, which is fine. That's not my problem. The problem that I've got recently, which just really annoyed me, is I was down there maybe a couple of weeks ago, and the person wasn't available, and I spoke to someone, and they said, the person you were seeing is not available, but they'll be here next time. And they says, don't worry about it, we understand your position, we'll make an appointment for January, so January will be the next appointment. Which I thought, fine, I don't need to worry or think about that until after Christmas, which is fine by me. I can worry about other things. And then, because of the way they do things now, you don't get letters, you don't get phone calls, it's now automated. I got an email saying the appointment's no longer in January, but it's now early November. And I just found that is so disrespectful to anybody. You change it 3 months, particularly someone who's autistic who's trying to plan ahead and try to cope with life. And it's just really pissed me off. It's just that attitude. I'm not saying that it's going to be a bad experience or whatever. I just don't like this sudden change and that massive change. And I just think that lack of understanding is really damaging, not for just autistic people, but for anyone.
I accidentally managed to get myself hooked up to BBC Wiltshire this week, who wanted to do an interview with me regarding vets fees and how much they cost. She accidentally phoned me because the people in the office had given them my number. I have called in before, but she phoned me back and told me that she wanted to do this interview about cat and dog fees at the vets. And I said yes instantly, and then put the phone down and regretted it instantly, and then had to spend a few days sitting with that, which gave me massive amounts of panic. And then she turned up on the day, and I never let people into my house. I never do. So I let her in. I apologised for my house because it's a mess. I apologised for my autism because I felt that would probably sway things. And I did a 20-minute interview with her. It will be broadcast next week. But once I'd finished doing it, I felt this just rush of regret, adrenaline, not knowing where to put myself, wondering whether it was any good. We will see, because I will be able to hear it apparently tomorrow being broadcast. But it was a very strange experience. It's not something that I would normally do, but there I was.
There, Lucy. I've done that myself, actually. Same sort of thing. I did an interview. I think I may have spoke about it, and it was back in July, talking about some of the community work that I was doing. It was for the local Lumen TV, it's called. It's like a local kind of community channel on Facebook and on their website, YouTube, etc. But at least it wasn't in my home. I actually went to their actual studio. If it was in my home, I'd be really dreading a lot more, just because, I don't know, because my home's my home and it is the way it is. The thing about this thing is it was done in July, and I thought it would have been broadcast by now. And I've been waiting on it for quite some time, but I don't want to kind of contact them and tell them to hurry up. Because I'm thinking, how do I look? How do I sound? Not that I feel that I've done anything bad, it's just that perfectionism thing. And I don't want to say overstressing me, but it is lingering in my head a little bit, so I can certainly relate to quite a lot of what you were saying there, Lucy.
Yeah, I caught myself in a position where I wanted to do it. I'm not really shy of microphones, as you can hear. It was a difficult one to navigate. Like I say, they accidentally got my number because they found the wrong Lucy in their little phone book and gave her the number. And it was only by coincidence that I just so happened to own a 7-month-old cat and have just been through some problems with vet bills, out of hours ones. And she said, yeah, you'll be perfect. That'd be great. You know, what a happy coincidence. And so I felt I really should do this, shouldn't I? But even now, I'm dreading it. It goes out tomorrow. I know it's going to go out tomorrow in the news. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to listen to it because I don't know what I'm going to sound like. It was audio. There was no video. It is just for radio purposes only. Thanks for asking, Teresa. Yeah, no, it was, I did, one of the stipulations was I'm not going to be on this, am I? They did in the end take a photo of me holding my cat. So that's also going to be in there because there's going to be a written piece, like a companion alongside it. But no, I didn't. Absolutely no way was I going to appear in camera.
That he struggles with arrangements being imposed upon me. Your experience at the beginning of this. When you texted, Lucy, you said you broke your rule of letting someone into my house as I did an interview on BBC Wiltshire. I had a pre and a post-event panic, and I'm still feeling it now, as you've explained. Makes total sense. And you were asked if video and audio, and they hope that you're relieved now after your experience. GR says that he's just put his name forward for a study at the local university on autism and mental illness. I know it's important. After I did the student film a couple of years ago, I thought it would be the closing of that chapter. Continuing to contribute to Autistic Radio, I consider a step forward, and yet I also still feel I'm going back.
It's 5:44 now, so our drop-in hour is finished, and thank you to all the people who have texted, and also to the people who have put their voices to this, that are going to allow us to put some of those words out into the podcast. If you join us here at the 444, your voice isn't recorded, your text isn't recorded, but the people here have given permission so that it's an example for others. See you again, always reliably, Sunday, 4:44 p.m. Cheers, guys.